Hi, welcome to Ask, a podcast series by Amartha,
Stella,
and Katie.
Today we're going to be discussing the book Balzac and the Little Chinese Seamstress. So let's dive in, shall we?
Yes.
So, ladies, where does this book take place?
Takes place on a mountainside in China during the Cultural Revolution, during the 60s and 70s, and the mountain is called the Phoenix Mountain.
And Mao Zedong, the leader of China during that time period, sent intellectual children, or like the children of intellectuals, away to re-education camps so that they wouldn't rebel against the communist government.
Yes, and
Yeah, so I think that's pretty much all for setting.
Yeah.
Let's just go into the plot right away.
Okay.
So, do you guys want to talk a little bit about the significance of the relationship between Luo and then the boy that they don't actually state the name of, and their friendship and their the relationship with their parents as well, and what their parents do?
So, I think it's really interesting how both of the boys' parents are doctors or some form of it, because it kind of shows how they're kind of more educated, I should say. And the Cultural Revolution was all about re-educating them to a lower level. And both of these boys, their lives are their personalities and lives are a little bit different before the camp. Lu's parents, I think, are dentists, and the unnamed narrator's parents are just a form of doctors, I believe. And their friendship is interesting because it shows a deep connection of loyalty.
So why do you guys think that they decided to send the children of intellectuals away to the countryside, or the villages rather, than keep them in the cities?
I would say specifically the two boys in the book, they go to a mountainside where they are faced with a lot of labor. So I think Mao was trying to coerce them into I don't know how to
almost
yeah,
making them do
Yeah,
the work while at the
lesser,
same
yeah.
time as not allowing them to be involved in protest or something.
yeah, exactly.
Because if they're doing labor all the time,
exactly, distracting them from what's really going on, or taking away their the knowledge that they already have, or was getting built up.
Plus, they're also in the countryside. It was secluded, so it kind of shows that in a physical representation.
And then one thing I thought that was really interesting, because they introduced the little Chinese seamstress almost right away, is their description of her and their description of her shoes, and how she's the only one that wears shoes in the village, and they described as almost delicate and soft. And I think they show a little bit of her sophistication. What do you guys think about the significance of the fact that she's the only one that wears the shoes, or doesn't need to wear shoes necessarily?
I think the significance is that her personality she's very adventurous, and she is kind of fearless in the sense that the other two boys have a little bit of fear when they are at the camps, but it shows how she likes to do things that are not necessarily the norm. Shoes represent the ending when she kind of travels to the city, because it kind of shows how she uses her feet to walk away to a new place, and how she's taking charge of her life.
I would say, I think the significance is that she's a woman and none of the men have shoes. So I think it highlights, even though she's really young, I think it highlights the importance of women in their culture, and how and for the two characters in the book, how she is their gateway into adulthood.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how she's basically the only woman that they talk about in the book, other than the mother of Four Eyes. It doesn't really seem like they mention any other women or girls in the village. It's very focused on her.
Speaking of, what do you guys think about the little seamstress running away at the end of the book, rather than the author just having a cliche ending where Luo and the little seamstress fall in love and get married or something like that?
Well, I definitely think it talks a little bit about the Cultural Revolution. For the little Chinese seamstress, it was like more magical to be able to have that kind of freedom that was like so restricted from her, and like the kind of like stories she heard that were only she felt available to her in like the city or like through her own search for identity, than like having love, especially since she's so young and she maybe had that already with him like for a little bit. I also think it's interesting how like they focus on the little Chinese seamstress rather than like the two main characters, the boys at the end of the novel.
I was thinking that the author also tried to show like how like not a cliche ending kind of shows how like the Cultural Revolution was like a time period of like people kind of not finding themselves but like doing new things. Like what was important wasn't like what was traditionally important. So like values were changing, and the city was like a place where like the values were kind of changing, whereas the countryside was tradition.
I would say I definitely wasn't surprised when she left, and I think it's really interesting that she like kind of takes the role of almost one of their characters in the books they're reading. Like the individual is like taking hold of like their destiny and whatnot, and so I thought it was
Yeah, and actually I think that kind of relates to like the fact where all throughout the beginning of the book it's like from the perspective of like a singular character, and then near the end you hear like the perspective of like the little Chinese seamstress, maybe as she like realizes that the stories they're telling her could like be part of her own search for her identity.
Yeah, because it's all based on novels. Like the whole thing has like books as like key theme for.
Yeah, they're very influential.
All right, shall we move on to the theme?
Yeah,
sure.
Cool. Okay, so I'll start. So a big theme that I noticed throughout this book was freedom, and there's a really good quote that exemplifies this. This is in the context of when he's reading a book, and he says, when he refers to he's thinking, or he's referring to a character in the book, but he says, he was unlikely to object to my beatings, a retreat in the face of death, I thought. After all, how could I die now without having known love or sex, without having taken free individual action against the whole world as he had? I was filled with the desire to live. I turned full circle, still on my knees, and crawled back to the start. To lose my balance would have meant hurtling into a void, and I clung to the earth for dear life. Suddenly, I thought of Blue. So, I think this kind of shows how during the Cultural Revolution, freedom was something that was very restricted and minimized, but like in the novel, their way of freedom is like books and literature and storytelling, which kind of shows how like in the midst of everything, like storytelling and literature has a power to evoke emotions and like convey things that are not traditional. And this is symbolized through the alarm clock, which is a key symbol throughout the book. And the alarm clock is something that they bring to the camp, and usually the guards seize it because it's not allowed on the camp. But the alarm clock that they had is so small that they were able to bring it into the camp. And he talks about it, how, quote, it became an object of veneration almost. Everyone came to consult the clock as though our house on stilts were a temple. Every morning saw the same ritual. The village headman would pace to and fro, smoking his bamboo pipe, which was long as an old-fashioned rifle, and all while keeping a watchful eye on the clock. So the clock was used as something that the people in the camp, or especially Lou and the narrator, would change the time on as a way to like get back this freedom that was taken from them. And like the villagers too do that, and this was like obviously not allowed, but it kind of shows how different avenues can be, like unconventional avenues can bring or give you freedom in unexpected ways.
So the theme that I kind of saw throughout the book was like coming of age and like manhood for the two main characters. And one of the quotes that I'm going to pull is in the context of when the narrator is like fantasizing about painting little seamstress nails, and